Hello Duelists, Jerome from R&D back again. I'm back from the 150th YCS in Columbus, where I got to see a lot of different decks and a whole lot of dueling. And one thing really stood out to me amongst all those duels and duelists. A lot of people came with tellarknights, and not a lot of them saw an appreciable amount of success. Only one duelist made it to top 32 with tellarknights, and honestly I expected a lot more. So I got to thinking and taking a look at some deck lists, and I think I found the problem. There is a whole lot of defense in tellarknight decks these days, and not a whole lot of offense. You can't win any games if you don't have any offense, and current tellarknight decks are playing between 20 and 22 trap cards and 9 or 10 monsters. So you don't actually have a whole lot of cards to win the game with, but when you do get too many of them at once and not enough trap cards, your strategy falls apart. I have a proposed solution to this, and it is made possible by the Zefra cards in Cross Souls. So let me show you a deck that I came up with. Starts off like any regular tellarknight deck with 3 copies of Saddler Knight Deneb. Being able to search out all the rest of the cards in your deck at will is extremely useful. You want to see this card as early and often as possible, so you definitely play 3. At its heart, it's still just a tellarknight deck, so you use all the same basic combos that a tellarknight deck does. And that means 3 copies of Saddler Knight Altair. Altair is a great first search with Deneb, and if you already happen to have one, in addition to your Deneb, you can use Deneb to then get one of your Pendulum monsters. Unalkalai is also usually seen as a 1 or 2 of in most tellarknight decks. I'm going to go ahead and run 3 for simplicity, and also to try to max out my chances of seeing Deneb as early and often as possible. In this deck, the combinations to get Deneb on your first turn are drawing Deneb or Reinforcement of the Army, or drawing Unalkalai and one of the cards that can revive Deneb from your graveyard. Your overall chances are something like a bit less than 2/3 of the time going first, and a bit less than 3/4 of the time going second. You can adjust that with other cards like Tellarknight Skybridge, but more on that later. Finally, for monsters, we have our Pendulum monsters. Tellarknight Zefra is a high defender, but it can be used to destroy any face-up card. That is something that tellarknights really lack, is the ability to get rid of monsters that are bigger than them. A lot of people say things like, oh, if you have a 1900 monster, tellarknights can't do anything to hurt you, or if you flip Mistake, tellarknights can't do anything to hurt you. Well, that's not true anymore, and Tellarknight Zefra is to thank for it. And your other Pendulum monster is Stellar Knight Zefra. Zefra is a 1900 like Rigel without the self-destruction ability, and he also has the ability to take out face-down cards by destroying other cards in your Pendulum zones or other tellarknights on the field. This is a very powerful effect attached to a very powerful body, and you really want to see as many copies of Stellar Knight Zefra in each duel as you possibly can. And that is it for monsters. Tellarknight deck is still pretty light on monsters, but at least now you have a strong offensive player in the form of Zefra that can help you in those decks where your opponent digs in, and you have Zefra to act as extra removal if you need it. That does it for the monsters. Next up, spells. Most of the spells are used to go and fetch more monsters. So first off, Reinforcement of the Army. You definitely want to play 3 of these because it counts as any other monster in your deck. Including Zefra, even though it's a fiend, because you can search for it by getting Reinforcement of the Army for Deneb, and then using Deneb's effect to get Zefra. Next up, Oracle of Zefra. With Oracle of Zefra, you can go straight for either of your 2 Pendulum monsters, which lets you save your Deneb searches and Reinforcement of the Armies for your actual tellarknights. You want to get as many monsters as possible into your hand with this deck, because unlike the standard tellarknight deck, you can get them all out of your hand immediately if you Pendulum summon. Next up, we've got some just generically good and powerful spells. If you watched our live stream from the 150th, you saw a lot of games swung by Ray Geki. I would not play without it right now. It's too good. Well, I mean, it just destroys all monsters your opponent controls. That effect is never not good, even if your opponent's monsters are just going to turn into other cards. Next up is Book of Moon. Book of Moon can turn off the dreaded Djinn Releaser lock, but you can also use it to flip one of your own monsters face down, so that you can flip summon it later and claim its effect again. You can also use it in response to an effect failure to prevent your monster's effect from being negated, or you can use it when you special summon while Lose a Turn is on the field to make sure your monster's effect goes through. Face down monsters haven't got effects. Next up, Soul Charge. I don't think I've ever played a Tellarknight deck without as many copies of Soul Charge as I was allowed to have in it. It's a way to get a lot of Xyz materials on the field at the same time, and you get it at a 1,000-point discount compared to other decks, as long as you target Tellarknight Altair. Altair's effect can revive another Tellarknight on its own, so Soul Charge for 2 becomes a Soul Charge for 3, but you only pay 2,000. Well, you lose 2,000. Remember, it's not a payment. Finally, I go with a pair of Swords of Concealing Light. Swords of Concealing Light is a lot like the Book of Eclipses that you see a lot of people playing right now, except in a Tellarknight deck it's infinite, thanks to the power of Triber, which we'll get to a little later on. Last, traps. Start with the basics. 3 Call of the Haunted. This is important for getting to Tellarknight Deneb and also using it as many times as you possibly can. Stellar Nova Alpha. I don't include the full 3 copies here, but you cannot ever let your opponent think that you might not have it. Stellar Nova Alpha, its ability to negate a spell, trap, or monster effect, destroy the offending card, and let you draw 1 card. It's not something you can pass up on completely, and you want to make sure your opponent always at least thinks you might have it, even if you don't. A pair of Breakthrough Skill really helps you out against Shaddolls and Necros, which a lot of people are playing right now. Fiendish Chain is much the same, except it can also block attacks. So I have 3 copies of that and 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill because I want to conserve as many life points as possible. A lot of players, especially Necros and Shadow players, are playing extremely aggressively right now, so being able to block attacks is important, and so is being able to block effects, and Fiendish Chain does both. Speaking of blocking attacks, I'm using a pair of Mirror Force. A lot of players are kind of shying away from battle traps right now, but the more duels I observed, the more aggressive I saw other duelists being. So some people have started with Dimensional Prison to take out things like El Shaddai Winda, but I think it's a little more important for my main deck to be able to take out a horde of Necros monsters all at once. For example, if they summon Valkyris and Unicorn off of Necros Kaleidoscope. And then finally a pair of one-offs. I've got Ring of Destruction there. This is the new version of Ring of Destruction from Premium Gold 2. It's different than the original Ring of Destruction, but it's still really good and effectively the same thing a vast majority of the time. It can break you out of a Djinn lock, it can take out the Necros of Unicorn at the end of your opponent's turn, so that your Triber can go through just fine. It just does a ton of different things for you. And last is Vanity's Emptiness. The best Necros monster or Shadow Fusion monster is the one that never hits the field against you, and Vanity's Emptiness makes that happen. So, what are we going to do with all of those monsters? Oracle of Zefra and the Zefra monsters can get them for you, and they can let you special summon them all from your hand. But then it's what you do with them that really counts. So, extra deck. For this deck I chose to focus primarily on the Stellar Knight Xyz monsters. So I've got 3 copies of Triber. I used to think that 2 copies were enough, but after I played enough really long matches against Necros, I went up to 3. 2 Deltaros I think is about right. It's got a powerful effect. Well, it's got 3 powerful effects, all of which are useful because you're playing the Tellarknight deck. And it's just big. 2500 attack, can destroy things, can prevent responses to your summons, so further Tellarknight effects won't get negated when you summon them. If you can keep it on the field for a turn, it can even turn off the defense switching ability of lose a turn. Next up, Consular Diamond. With it, all these people running Shadows lately, you definitely need Consular Diamond. I almost considered 2 of them, just in case they blast the first one with a Raigeki or Dark Hole, but I wound up playing only 1. Also one off of the new Tellarknight Ptolemaeus from Crossholes. This card is a way to get Diamond out only using 2 materials, which is pretty valuable since a lot of times when Winda is on the field, you're restricted in how many special summons you can possibly make. So being able to special summon 1 monster at the end of your opponent's turn and then normal summon 1 on your turn can be very valuable, because then you combine your 2 monsters into Ptolemaeus, attach an Xyz material at the end of your turn, and then on your opponent's turn you can use the rank up ability to turn it into Consular Diamond. And last off, for the really big Xyz monsters, I've got number 86 Heroic Champion Rongominiad from World Superstars. With Pendulum Summoning and all of the extra Deneb searches you'll get, and the extra cards that you get off of Oracle of Zefra, just keep in mind here that Zefra Thubin is a warrior as well. It is not out of the realm of possibility to have a 4 or 5 material Rongominiad on your second turn. And if you get 5, you basically won the duel because your opponent can't play any cards for 3 turns that'll do anything, and you'll hit them for 3,000 each. So that is another way that you can just straight up win if you can get enough monsters on the field. And that's something that was the challenge for Tellarknight decks. They didn't have enough monsters, and when they did get all the monsters, they couldn't put them all on the field at the same time. And then I have some basic rank 4s. Diamond Direwolf can take out anything, and it removes itself from the field as well, giving you more space to summon more monsters, or just to get your extra deck monster off the field so you don't eat a full-powered Shadow Fusion. Evil Swarm Exciton Knight clears the field out. Abyss Dweller, extremely powerful against both Shadows and Burning Abyss, and since it stops the effect of cards that would activate in your opponent's graveyard, you can also use this to prevent your opponent from searching out more Necros Ritual spells. 2 copies of Gaga Cowboy. I did the math on a lot of the attack points and the attack scenarios to find out which ones will get me to 8,000 the fastest, and I discovered that a lot of them only get your opponent down to about 1,500, where 1 Cowboy wouldn't take them out, but 2 Cowboys will. And one of the mind games that goes on when you play against a Necros opponent is how much damage are they willing to take before they use their Necros of Valkyris to end your battle phase. And what I found is a lot of times they are willing to take enough damage to get them between 1,000 and 1,600. If it would take them to 1,000, they'll use it because you might have Tellarknight Alsam to deal that last 1,000. But if you can't get that many, they figure Alsam can't beat them, and Cowboy can't beat them, so they'll just let it through. If you have 2 Cowboys, then anything 1,600 or lower is game for you. And finally, 2 copies of Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer. From Duelist Alliance originally, he'll be in the Megatins later this year. This guy basically takes out any face-up card for both of his materials, shuffles it back into the deck. A lot of people use 1 number 101 and 1 Castel. 101 is more of a specialized card. I wanted a more generic card, so I went with 2 copies of Castel. As for the side deck, I'm not telling. You can tailor that to your own needs based on the tournaments that you're going to play in and the environments around you. But I will offer a few suggestions on different ways that you could take this strategy. For one, you could increase your chances to open with Stellarknight Deneb. 1 copy of Stellarknight Skybridge in your main deck can actually increase that chance, I wouldn't say too highly, but increases it enough to get you up to seeing it in 80% of your games. If you want to add more pendulum monsters, there's Flash Knight from Duelist Alliance. You can get him directly with Reinforcement of the Army, so you don't have to use your normal summon on Deneb to go get Zefraxiton if you need a card with scale 7. There's also Zefraxi, Treasure of the Gang Zing, from Cross Souls. And this card actually lets you take your deck in a completely different direction, and one that your opponents might not expect. With the ability to turn your monsters into tuners, all of a sudden your extra deck possibilities increase by leaps and bounds. For example, there's a new Clearwing Synchro Dragon from Cross Souls. You saw this guy on stream, I believe a couple times, just destroying people in YCS Columbus, and normally you would have no chance to play it in a Tellarknight deck. But with Zefraxi and either of your other Zefra Pendulum monsters, for example this, you can make a level 7. So that could be Clearwing Synchro Dragon, or because your non-tuner material is... Oh, lost my non-tuner material. Well, you can get this, you could get Yazi, you could get Black Rose Dragon, any of those things. Or, let's say you have multiple Zefra monsters available when you make your Pendulum Summon. Let's say you've got one of each. You could turn one into a tuner, and then get a level 8. For example, Stardust Dragon is useful for keeping your monsters safe from Regeki, or stopping Exciton Knight from wiping out your whole setup. Or you could even use Crimson Blader to try to lock your opponent down from their high-level special summons. Another idea would be to play a little stronger into Tellarknight Ptolemaeus. And you can do that by including a bunch of other rank 5 monsters. A lot of people like Tiras, Keeper of Genesis, because it's immune to destruction by card effects while it has materials, and it can destroy extra cards when it attacks. There's also Consular Pleiades. Pleiades is a very disruptive monster. It can bounce away any card on the field during either player's turn. There's also Artifact Durendal. We actually saw that on stream for the 150th. It can disrupt your opponent's hand by forcing them to shuffle it back in and then draw a new one. It's best used in response to a ritual spell, or a fusion spell like Shadow Fusion. Another way you could go is by decreasing your reliance on the themed monsters and including a few more generic monsters. Fujinte Tsukiyomi can get you more cards to draw. You could even add a third Castel. Starliege Paladynamo can negate the effects of a monster and drop its attack points to 0, giving you an avenue for a lot of direct damage, and if it's destroyed you get to draw another card. And then if you're afraid that you'll run out of cards to summon and play, you can always use Daigusto Emerald to put some monsters back into your deck. Best used with Altair so you can continue to loop them with Deneb. And that is about it. In terms of cards you might already have, the Tellarknights are mainly from Duelist Alliance. The Zefra and Oracle of Zefra are all from Cross Souls. Tellarknight Ptolemaeus is as well, but the rest of the Xyz monsters are mostly from the last year's worth of booster sets. You can get some of these cool Gold Rare cards in Premium Gold 2, Regeki's from Gold 2, Reinforcements from Gold 1, and there's actually a Gold Rare version of Kalhan as well, but I'm using Platinum ones from the Noble Knight box because I like them. Oh, and Ring of Destruction is in Premium Gold 2. Return of the Bling. And that'll about do it for this. Don't forget to subscribe to us here on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter at Yu-Gi-Oh!_TCG. You can also follow us on Facebook at Official Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG and check out our strategy site, which you can get to from the gameplay section of the official website. That'll about do it for me. Keep on dueling, have fun.